Welcome back to the channel, my friends. On today's video, we are going to be fixing the knocking sound on this 6.7 diesel. You may be able to hear the knocking sound from the clip you just heard. It's a very common sound that's created by the CP3 injector pump on these 6.7s or even the older 5.9 motors. Sometimes it almost sounds like a rattle and almost sounds like a rod knock when you're taking off. On this particular truck, you mostly hear it on takeoffs. It's not that bad on idle, but you can hear it. But again, depending on what device you're listening to, it may sound different, but it's definitely there. It's very annoying. Some trucks have them right off the bat, some never get them, but it is easily fixable. The way to do that is basically retiming the injector pump to the engine. And I know these injector pumps don't have to be retimed. That subject has been beaten to death over and over. We are not retiming it. We are basically just rephasing it. We're removing the gear, pulling the gear off the pump, rotating the engine, and putting the gear right back on. It's just a harmonic noise that's created by the pump. And this rephasing it will get rid of that noise. So let's get started. So what makes it easier is removing the belt off of the power steering here. That does give you a little better access. You can also remove the upper hose if that makes it easier for you. But I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to keep the belt and the hose intact. I should be able to reach it through from bottom of the belt. There is a cover, inspection cover, that you can take off of that timing cover to access the gear. So let's go ahead and remove that cover. Here are some of the tools that you will need to complete this job. One simple tool is a barring tool for the Cummins. This will help you rotate the engine. You will also need a 1 1/16 socket for the nut that's on the injector pump gear. You will also need a gear puller for the pump. You can certainly use a puller like this by cutting the center shaft smaller, but there's no reason to mess around with that. This tool here is fairly inexpensive. It's made to do that, and it works perfect. You will also need a torque wrench to put the nut back onto the gear on the injector pump. You'll need a breaker bar to loosen that nut, and also you will need a socket to tighten these bolts when pulling the gear off of the shaft. The gear itself is pressed onto the shaft. It doesn't have a key weight or anything like that. It's kind of like a power steering pulley, so you are just pulling it off, and it will not come off all the way since the cover is still on. It will hold it there, and that's all you need. So let's get started. I will put links to all the tools that you may need or make this job easier in the description for you. Here I have the timing cover off. It just spins off when you turn it counterclockwise. I just used a little extension socket that fits right in. You want to make sure that locks in all the way so you're not stripping it. They can be kind of tight. And just using a ratchet, turning it counterclockwise removes it. Now we can access our 1 1/16 bolt that's holding the gear. There is also a lock washer behind that bolt. It's kind of hard to see since I didn't remove the belt. It's kind of behind the belt here, the opening that you can see. So that cover is off. Now we can take our 1 1/16 socket and get that nut off of the gear. Once you get the nut loose, you do want to be careful not to drop the nut inside of the timing cover or the lock washer that's behind that nut. So you do want to be careful. Otherwise, you'll create yourself a whole lot of more work dropping it in there. You can try to stuff a rag right on the edge of that just to take up that room, but a magnet definitely helps in case that washer comes loose and wants to fall in there. I was able to remove that 1 1/16 bolt by using this socket and a ratchet. I did end up using a little pipe end on it since they are kind of tight. So this is a lock washer. You don't want to drop in there. So you want to be careful. I just had a magnet on the side, kind of holding it so it wouldn't drop. I have my puller onto the CP3 gear here. Now all I need to do is tighten up the nuts on these on this puller. My apologies, it's going to be kind of hard to see. But all I need to do now is tighten up the bolts on the puller, and that should pull the gear off of the CP3, off of the injector pump. Then we'll go ahead and rotate the engine and re-tighten up that gear back on the injector pump. We'll go ahead and rotate the engine 30 degrees, and if that doesn't work, rotate it another 30 degrees, so keeping it 60 degrees. One thing that does help is to mark your balancer at top dead center, so you know how much you're rotating. You can keep track of how many degrees you've turned the motor. 60 degrees seems to be the sweet spot where everybody kind of loses that knocking noise. Maybe we'll just go 60 degrees right off the bat and see what happens. So now that we have rotated our engine after loosening the gear on the injector pump, we'll go ahead and put this lock washer and nut back on it and torque that to 77 foot-pounds. So I was able to go ahead and re-tighten up the gear onto the pump. I did have to have somebody hold the motor because they wanted to keep turning as I'm trying to get my 77 foot-pounds of torque onto that nut. So it does help to have somebody hold the motor. You can either go from the front, the socket on the crank pulley, and having somebody hold it, or you can go on the back end also and have a pry bar or something in between the flywheel gear and hold it that way. That's actually how I did it. Worked out well. Now we got everything buttoned up. Let's fire this thing up and see what it sounds like. So there you have it. I was able to take the truck for a drive. It's much quieter. That CP3 knock is just about gone. It's slightly there. I did right off the bat just did 60 degrees. Maybe I should have just done 30 and then gone on from there. But I'm quite happy with the changes that made. It's much quieter. That rattling sound is gone on takeoff. It doesn't sound like I have a rod knock anymore like it did before. So I'm quite happy with that. Hopefully you're able to hear it. I know it's kind of difficult depending on the device that you're using to listen to that. But it's definitely made a huge difference. It just sounds much quieter, tighter. So that's a fairly simple job to do. You can do it within 25 minutes or so. Again, if you don't feel comfortable with the amount of room that you have, you can always remove the upper hose, and you can always remove the belt on that side to gain access to that gear. Now, you may have to do it a few times, 2 or 3 times, to get rid of the noise completely. That just depends on where the gear is and where it needs to be quiet. If this helped you, please give it a thumbs up. I thank you for watching.